Hello, good evening, that's right, great and glorious, soon to be famous one day, Nick Dutch back on the camera again. Today I'm going to do another little bit of reading, and we're going back to one of the key books, basically, for those who are interested in things such as witchcraft, magic, the occult, and the rest of it. Why am I choosing this author? Well, when I personally started my reading and investigation of the occult, even prior to getting involved in a face-to-face level with people involved in the pagan movements, the New Age movement, the occult movement, and so on and so forth, I decided to put myself through a course of reading, and of course I read through some great books like The Projection of the Astral Body by Sylvan Muldoon and Hereward Carrington, and I went through the list of references basically. And some of those books I got from the library, some of them I bought, and I built up basically a body of personal knowledge about what the occultists were basically talking about. Now, Alphonse Louis Constant, who for theatrical reasons called himself Eliphias Levi, in a similar manner to why I call myself Nick Dutch, I suppose, wrote this book way back in the 1800s. Let's just try and get the precise and accurate date for you, just so you get a feeling of its antiquity. 1896, okay, so before the 1900s, a little before the First and eventually the Second World War. This French guy wrote this book, and it's fascinating. What is most interesting about Alphonse Louis Constant is some of the ways in which he writes. There's some daft ideas in his writings, yes, but there's also little pearls of wisdom thrown in. He does say that all mythology is true in a certain manner. So when he's coming out with the more preposterous ideas, I feel he's trying to encourage us to think about the allegorical meanings rather than necessarily the literal meanings. Alright, so that's something you've got to bear in mind. But he was also a ceremonial occultist as well. We're just going to read a few little sections from this so you get a feeling for some of his ideas. Firstly, from page 4 within the introduction. The original alliance between Christianity and the science of the Magi, namely of course magic, what he's talking about, once demonstrated fully, will be a discovery of no second-rate importance. We do not doubt that the serious study of magic and the Kabbalah will lead earnest minds to a reconciliation of science and dogma, of reason and faith, heretofore regarded as impossible. So he seems to be saying that magic itself is something which is like something which bridges the gap and maybe even overarches and supersedes both science and religion. It's interesting that he should mention dogma here. Let's move further on into the book and see what else he says about dogma. From page 41 of the same volume. The ethic which results from revelation is founded on antagonism, and this results from the duad. Spirit and the form interact and repel one another, like sign, idea, fiction, and truth. Supreme reason necessitates dogma when communicating to finite intelligences, and dogma, by its passage from the domain of ideas to that of forms, participates in two worlds and has inevitably two senses, testifying in succession or simultaneously, that is, to the spirit and to the flesh. So here, what he's talking about is ideas or ideologies starting manifest in the mind and then moving on into action. But he's also saying supreme reason necessitates dogma. So he's talking about using intelligence, reason, and logic to try and get people to do things. Alright? So in that respect, he's actually going against dogma and saying that dogma itself is not necessarily a good thing for someone who is very intelligent. But there is a certain quality of individual who actually needs belief, faith, and all the rest of that. So he understands religion and religiosity in a very interesting manner. Okay, he evidently sees himself as being of the superior caste or class, so that he can then tell other people what to do and what to think. But he's also explaining that there are inferior people who need to be basically blind believers, because that's basically what they are. I'm sure we've all come across people who are in need of blind belief. And maybe this is why the occult and science is frowned upon by people who are of certain religious orientations, because you've got to be a thinking person to actually read this stuff And you've got to be a thinking person to be able to look at science and to have certain quantity of acceptance of what science is as opposed to what religion says. So he's going against literalism, which I really rather like. Okay, I mean, there's lots of other things he says which I don't like, but these things are really quite fascinating. Now, he does talk about the human condition. Remember, he tends to see magic itself as being a science in its own right. So it would make sense that he would talk to a certain degree about the human condition, about you and I and what we like up here, okay? Now listen to this from page 86. There is an outbreathing and inbreathing of the soul, exactly like that of the body. Why would he mention that? I mean, he goes into his theory or his hypothesis in a greater detail, but I feel he's talking about catharsis there, and the need to express yourself. So there is a lot of interesting psychological ideas as well as standard sort of more academic, intellectual, religious ideas which do appear in the writings of some of the classical occultists. But let's move on to something a little more interesting, okay? This is within the chapter on necromancy, which I think is pretty groovy, on page 23. And we're just going to read through a couple of pages here. What he's doing is describing a particular operation, as he calls it, basically a ritual, a ceremony, a religious ritual, done primarily for mediumistical purposes. And I'm going to stop a little way into this and try and explain, analyze, or break down what he's saying, because I think it's important, bearing in mind he's already made a statement that he's going against literalism. Alright, he's going against dogma, and he's trying to encourage a certain quantity of thought and analysis. Obviously there's still some ways. I mean, this was written well over 100 years ago now, so science hadn't advanced all that much, neither with technology, but he's bearing in mind the time he was writing in, and the fact he was an occultist. There's still some fascinating ideas there. But let's move straight on to this particular part of the necromancy section from page 123. The preliminaries terminated on the 24th of July. It was proposed to evoke the phantom of the divine Apollonius and interrogate it upon two secrets, one which concerned myself and one which interested the lady. She had counted on taking part in the evocation with a trustworthy person, who, however, proved nervous at the last moment, and as a triad or unity is indispensable for magical rites, I was left to my own resources. The cabinet prepared for the evocation was situated on a turret. It contained 4 concave mirrors, and a species of altar having a white marble top encircled by a chain of magnetized iron. The sign of the pentagram, as given in the 5th chapter of this work, was graven and gilded on the white marble surface. It was inscribed also in various colours upon a new white lambskin outstretched beneath the altar. In the middle of the marble table there was a small copper chafing dish containing charcoal of alder and laurel wood. Another chafing dish was set before me on a tripod. I was clothed in a white garment very similar to the garb of our Catholic priests, but longer and wider. I wore upon my head a crown of vervain leaves intertwined with a golden chain. That's what I call extravagant. I held a new sword in one hand, and in the other the ritual, namely the second part of this book. I kindled 2 fires, and with the requisite prepared substances and began to reading the evocations of the ritual in a voice at first low, but rising by degrees. The smoke spread, the flame caused the objects upon which it fell to waver, and then it went out, the smoke still floating white and slow about the marble altar. I seemed to feel a quaking of the earth, my ears tingled, my heart beat quickly. I heaped more twigs and perfumes upon the chafing dishes, and as the flame again burst up, I beheld distinctly, before the altar, a figure of a man of more than normal size, which dissolved and vanished away. I recommenced the evocations and placed myself within the circle which I had drawn previously between the tripod and the altar. Thereupon The mirror, which was behind the altar, seemed to brighten in its depth. A wan form was outlined therein, which increased and seemed to approach by degrees. 3 times, and with closed eyes, I invoked Apollonius. When I again looked forth, there was a man in front of me, wrapped from head to foot in a species of shroud, which seemed more grey than white. He was lean, melancholy, and beardless, and did not altogether correspond to my preconceived notion of Apollonius. I experienced an abnormally cold sensation, and when I endeavoured to question the phantom, I could not articulate a syllable. I therefore placed my hand upon the sign of the pentagram and pointed the sword at the figure, commanding it mentally to obey and not to alarm me, in virtue of the said sign. The form thereupon became vague and suddenly disappeared. I directed it to return, and presently felt, as it were, a breath close by me. Something touched my hand which was holding the sword, and the arm became immediately benumbed as far as the elbow. I divined that the sword displeased the spirit, and I therefore placed it point downward close by me within the circle. The human figure reappeared immediately, but I experienced such an intense weakness in all my limbs, and a swooning sensation came over me quickly. I made 2 steps to sit down, whereupon I fell into a profound lethargy, accompanied by dreams of which I had only a confused recollection when I came again to myself. For several subsequent days my arm remained benumbed and painful. The apparition did not speak to me, but it seemed that the questions I had designed to ask answered themselves in my mind. To that of the lady, an interior voice replied, "Death." It was concerning a man about whom she desired information. As for myself, I sought to know whether the reconciliation and forgiveness were possible between 2 persons whom occupied my thoughts. In the same exorable echo within me answered, "Dead." I am stating the facts as they occurred. Now, I think that's quite an important point, because what Alphonse Louis Constant, Eliphias Levi, is doing is saying this is what happened. Quite simply, just straight out. But I would not impose faith on no one. Okay, so he's actually saying there that you don't have to believe it. All you got to do is to see that this is what I'm telling you happened. And he's not forcing his opinion upon you. Okay? The consequence of this experience upon myself must be called inexplicable. I was no longer the same man. Something of another world had passed into me. I was no longer either sad or cheerful, but I felt a singular attraction towards death, unaccompanied, however, by any suicidal tendency. So he's explaining a very, very weird sensation. Okay, he himself is obviously quite uncomfortable about it. He can't understand it himself, but he's still professing that this is what he experienced, and so all he's doing is saying, this is what I experienced, and that's all I can do is just tell you this. Even more from page 125. I analysed my experience carefully, and notwithstanding a lively nervous repugnance, I repeated the same experiment on 2 further occasions, allowing some days to elapse between each. There was not, however, significant difference between the phenomena to warrant me in protracting a narrative which is perhaps already too long. So now what he's saying is that the experience more or less repeated itself, which is also quite fascinating. But the net result of these 2 additional evocations was for me the revelation of 2 Kabbalistic secrets. This is where he goes a bit pompous, I reckon. Which might change in a short space of time the foundations and laws of society at large if they came to be known generally. No, that's him just going a bit pretentious and blowing his ego up a bit too much. I don't think he's really discovered anything apart from the fact that you can have a strange experience, which is basically what he alluded to earlier on. Alright, but in that section, in that little sentence further on in the paragraph, what he's saying is, wow, this is a great revelation, and the whole world's going to get changed, which is in disagreement with what he said earlier on. So, I feel that what he's doing there is allowing you, as the reader to be able to draw your own conclusion. If you're the kind of person who can only think about, grandiose ideas, then those are there for you. If you're the kind of person who can be more analytical, then that sort of thing is there for you as well. So he's actually being quite generous in the quality of information that he's given to you. But now it gets a little more in-depth and interesting, and it goes back to the more agnostic perspective just for a short time, which again goes against the grandiosity which you just heard. Okay, even more, I think this is the final paragraph of page 125. Am I to conclude from all of this that I really evoked, saw and touched the great Apollonius of Tyana? I am not so hallucinated as to affirm, or so unserious as to believe it. That's fascinating. So he's had this incredible experience when he's seen this apparition which reached out and seemed to touch him and make his arm numb, alright, and spoke about death and created this peculiar melancholy over him that made him feel, think about death in a very melancholy manner but not want to kill himself, and it's totally overpowering for him. But he's wise enough and he's bright enough to be able to say that he's not so unserious as to believe it, so he's taking it all with a pinch of salt. So this is what makes Alphonse Louis Constant a really great occultist, because he can look at this tremendous over-the-top evocation, got like leaves on his head and gold chains and magnetized chains here, there and everywhere, whopping great, really complex versions of the pentagram etched out on a marble altar. But yet he's saying that, he doesn't know. And he's wise enough to be able to say he doesn't know. He's not like someone who's just had like a lucid dream experience and is then turning around and saying, oh, everybody, yes, I really did travel in time. Yeah. Yes, the aliens, they really are, trying to kill us. Yes. He's not like that section of the YouTube community who's like that. But he's also thrown in little red herrings there just to confuse you a bit. He goes on, and I'll just finish this off just for, I suppose, fun, prior to me giving him a little bit more of my own input. The effect of the preparations, the perfumes, the mirrors, the panticles, is an actual drunkenness of the imagination, which must act powerfully upon a person otherwise nervous and impressionable. I did not explain the physical laws by which I saw and touched. So again, he's saying he doesn't know, and it's basically a whopping great hallucinatory experience which will be made over the top by these pentagrams and altars and leaves and chains and all the rest of it, which is there to have the effect upon him. I affirm solely that I did see and that I did touch, and I saw clearly and distinctly apart from dreaming, and this is sufficient to establish the real efficacy of magical ceremonies. So, what he's saying, and this is interesting, because those of you who've been watching my videos for a while will see the correlation between what I say and what he says. Alright? He's saying, basically, that you can have a strange experience, and that a strange experience will only prove you can have a strange experience. And all of this in the writings of one of the greatest magicians of all time. Does that make you think about all the other, silly New Age, expensive crap that you get from certain bookshops in certain streets, in certain parts of London, or wherever, He gives a bit of a kind of cautionary message here. For the rest, I regard the practice as destructive and dangerous. If it became habitual, neither moral nor physical health would be able to withstand it. Alright, so he's actually saying, just be careful. Don't get obsessive. Try and see it in proportion. Lots of people talk about occultism or the writings of people like this, and they say, well, that's a load of bollocks, it's a load of bollocks, you can't really believe that there's spirits out there. Well, this is a good magician. This is a good occultist. And although he's got some grandiosity there, and he provides little red herrings to confuse you, he's saying that he does not believe, but he does experience, and he does want to experience, and he found it all fascinating. But he can't be sure. okay towards the end of the book. He suggests that he is in fact vaguely what you might call deistic. In fact, he believes in a creator of the universe because, life, the universe is also balanced and so beautiful, which is not necessarily something I would agree with because I don't think that we can prove it. Life and the universe is beautiful and magnificent, but we still don't know enough. So I don't think we can actually say that. But that was his theological belief. Okay, he was quite in favour of Christianity, but also he's analytical. So what I would say to you people who think that magicians are lunatics, maybe it's more a question of lunatics are lunatics. And some people just want to investigate nature, try and find out more, experiment, investigate, and just see what happens. And that's what I'm about, whether you like it or not. Alright, that's Great and Glorious, Soon to Be Famous One Day, Nick Dutch. Signing out for now. Keep your reason, keep your rationality, don't drive yourself crazy, and have fun.